Um, there's no doubt that 2023 has been a very rocky road for the online gaming industry, especially in the tax space. I'm going to address income tax first because I feel it's an easier creature to deal with currently. So I want to sort of take a step back and talk about how on gaming income has traditionally been taxed under income tax law, because the law and policy around income taxation of online gaming and the thought process is actually very different from what's been occurring in the GST space. So you need to understand that in India, we used to follow what is called a source conception of income, which means something was classified as income if you carried out an economic activity or you did it as a business or a vocation. So traditionally, income that came from gaming, whether it was lottery, betting, card games, puzzles, skill, no skill, income tax law didn't care, it wasn't taxed. There was a specific exemption on 10 clause 3 of the Income Tax Act, which said casual or non-recurring receipts are not income. And it was only somewhere around in 1972 when the government sort of altered the tax policy, not because it thought it was a sin good or because it wanted to sort of, have a moral ground to tax, but because it was simply because we were moving towards a net accretion concept of income, where we felt that if somebody is getting richer, maybe because of casual or non-recurring gains, they should pay tax. It's its ability to pay. And at the time, you were taxed at the applicable marginal rate. The exemption limit applied to you. You were allowed a deduction of expenses, and losses were also allowed in intra-source, gaming income. However, somewhere around 1986, the government sort of changed the law, and they decided that any income that was arising from gaming or card games or lottery betting, again, no distinction between skill or non-skill, would be taxed at the highest bracket on a gross basis. So no expenses would be allowed, and that would be taxed at the rate of 40%, which was prevailing at the time. Now, again, someone may say that this was done because, there was some sort of a morality argument attached to it, or in a way they were trying to regulate on gaming practices through taxation, but that was not the reason. The reason was very simple, and again, it was a revenue-based decision. They felt that it was very difficult at the time to factor in expensive or fictitious losses that people were creating. How do you monitor what is your revenue, and how do you monitor, what are the losses? And so at that point, they felt it's better to just not allow any expenses at all. And they also felt that people would argue, especially in the context of lottery winnings, etc., is that the gaming is divided into 2 or 3 people. So they would all try to claim the exemption limit and say no taxes are payable allowed, which is one of the reasons why they came up with the idea that there will be a flat rate of tax. So since 1986, the major key change that's occurred in the taxation of gaming in the income tax space has been in the context of online gaming. And I see this as a positive development because the government recognizes now that in the case of online gaming, it's actually possible to identify net winnings because everything happens through an appropriate banking channel. There is data, there's information which is available. This is not a case where it's possible for users or players to conjure fictitious losses. And I feel this is one of the reasons why there is a distinction that has been drawn between online gaming, where only net winnings are taxable, versus a situation of other gaming where they continue to say that there will not be any deductions that will be available while computing your income. Now, again, the government has set out Rule 133 of the income tax rule, which gives a very detailed procedure on how you compute the net winnings. There is, we must applaud the government where it's due in the sense that there is now certainty in terms of how do you treat bonuses, how do you treat referrals, fees, how do you deduct the original stake amount, at what point are you required to deduct TDS. So all of these things, there is clarity now. And the hope is that as the income tax policy evolves, we can, sort of continue on this path and get more nuanced, right? Because what happened earlier and the way the law and policy evolved was that whether you are performing or carrying out gaming activities as a profession, like in the case of esports, or whether you're doing it in as a hobby, or you're a casual gamer, it's all taxed under head other income. No deductions are permitted other than the net winnings, what is allowed therein. The hope is that maybe now that the government sees that in case of online gaming, it's possible to track, money flows, etc. They will come up with nuances where they will make this distinction on when you can actually be taxed under the head, professional business income and claim expenses vis-a-vis just doing a gross basis taxation otherwise. So that's to answer some of your questions on the income tax space. Of course, GST is altogether a different creature, and it has caused a lot of pain to the gaming industry recently. Let me take a step back and again start with what is the position that online gaming companies have been taking for a very long time. If you look at the business model, an online real money gaming essentially acts as a platform which facilitates a gameplay between two users. So monies are collected and held in trust, pursuant to which a certain percentage is allocated by the online gaming company towards the platform fee. And so it acts more in the role of an organizer, facilitator, technology provider. Since in GST, what you're essentially taxing is the supply of goods and service, the position that the online gaming industry took was that the service that we're supplying is actually the service of this platform. And so the only taxable revenue that we earn for GST purposes is the platform fee and not the entire stake amount, because that is essentially not my money, that is money held in trust. They then discharged an 18% GST on the platform fee on the basis that they were not supplying actionable claims to begin with, because if there were any exchange of actionable claims, it was between the users. Two, that even if you would argue that there was an actionable claims fall out of the definition for supply of goods and services unless they're related to betting or gambling. And so all the traditional jurisprudence that we've spoken about in the previous session, which sort of distinguishes these two from skill gaming, was used to contend that that the skill gaming sector is not betting and gambling, and so these are not taxable actionable claims for GST purposes. Now, this was, to my mind, a very cogent legal position that was advanced by many of the online gaming players. However, as we are all aware, the government tended to disagree. The GST authorities have sort of disagreed with this position, and that consequently led to the GST Council overall doing a whole policy overhaul of how do you tax lottery, how do you tax betting and gambling, do online gaming differ and they don't differ. And there have been numerous policy arguments that the gaming industry has done a laudable job in explaining to the government as to how they cannot be clubbed or categorized with lotteries, because they stand on a very different footing, especially, considering that regulatory law uses, similar concepts. Also, how their business model is very different than that of a lottery. In lottery, you are always playing against the house, whereas in many of these real money gaming business models, you are never really playing against the platform provider. You're actually merely an intermediary, as the mighty now sort of recognizes. Apart from these legal arguments, there were a bunch of arguments which are purely made on at a policy level from an economic standpoint, right? That the whole idea of regulating the gaming industry and taxing the gaming industry is to garner revenues for the government. So if you take the tax rate and the tax base so high such that it kills the industry, it is also counterproductive to the revenues that you're trying to generate. In addition, what does that do to a booming or growing industry, which is clearly creating jobs? It's clearly the next tech export from India to the world. The aftermath of the change in the GST policy has been that there are a lot of attritions. People have been being laid off. The small players have, shut shop. So does it make sense? Is the whole tax or the revenue that you seek to collect through this, or the fact that you're probably trying to regulate for purpose of social cost, a good enough reason? Does that really outweigh the whole downside that the industry is currently experiencing? So all of these arguments were advanced, and irrespective of that, I think the government has finally taken, or the GST Council has finally taken a decision that as of now, they will not distinguish between the taxation of lotteries, betting and gambling, and online gaming, the game of skill and game of, the chance argument aside, and that they would tax the entire stake amount at 28%. Of course, when the announcement came out, there was a lot of human cry, a lot of policy debate, and after that, the government sort of kind of came up to, it's sort of by way of an olive branch, said, look, we'll only tax the deposits if you are sort of replowing from your winnings back into the game. That staked amount would not be double taxed again, and that was some relief. And so, again, a lot of policy flip flop. And again, the gaming industry gets hopeful, and we now land to what I feel is a very Vodafone kind of a reminiscent stage. I started my career with Vodafone, and I feel like we're back there, where the forward-looking policy changes are trying to be ushered into the existing law, and unfortunately, the tax notices that have gone out to the gaming industry do not signal what we've been trying to signal to the foreign investor community, is that our country offers tax certainty. That when an investor makes an investment into India, he's able to understand his rate of return, he's able to understand what our legal system looks like. And what sometimes troubles me is that you'll see reports in the media saying tax evasion of this much dream 11. When you come from the tax circle, tax evasion is a very strong word. It implies tax fraud. Whereas here we've seen them take a very cogent legal argument. It may not be acceptable to the GST authorities, but that would not necessarily imply that there has been some grand tax evasion here. So I don't know to what extent I answered your question, but I've been speaking for a while, so I'll take a pause.